It's time we talked about a serious problem in Monster Hunter Wilds. The problem? A lack of colorful god. There's so many monsters in so little time. So much space in this game. It's honestly a big crime. Looking at all of these environments and all these cool places, we have a serious lack of seriously cool faces. For Wilds, bring back the old monsters who've been exiled, the ones who'd kill you as they'd flaunt their gorgeousness. Like a couple big boys flying wyverns without wings, effortlessly destroying you. There are two. One's in a blizzard, your clue, he's not a wizard, but you're through. The other likes heat, hates rock, screams loud, the horny fuck. If your name is Gravios, you're shit out of luck. So without further ado, and with plenty of time to savor it, let's talk about two monsters who are surely fan favorites. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, with the first Wilds beta recently wrapping up, I know a lot of people could not be more hyped for the upcoming game itself, and personally, despite trailer footage in the intro, I am still entirely blind to everything in the game, really, aside from the first initial reveal trailer, and then of course character creation, which I allowed myself to do in the beta. But everything else, I'm keeping a surprise for myself for release, so I can share my genuine first reactions with all of you when the time comes. That said, for now, one of the few ways for me to engage in my pure raw excitement for Wilds is to consider returning monsters from previous games in the series that I could see possibly coming back in this game, either because of a vague mechanical reason I might know, or even just because I think it's been too long since we've had the monster and I like them. Normally we focus on one specific monster or like an entire category of monsters if I think it's applicable, but today we're going to talk about two monsters together because you can't really talk about them separately. These are Ukanlos and Akantor, the white and black god respectively as far as their in-game titles. These guys were a very big deal when they were originally introduced and are pretty undoubtedly paired together ever since then. I don't think you could just release a Monster Hunter game from this point forward that has one of them without the other as well. They're just so perfectly tied to each other. Akantor is big, spiky, and violent like a gladiator. He takes great joy and pleasure in just beating the crap out of other creatures and proving his dominance, whereas Ukanlos is much more sort of territorial. He will defend the area that he hangs out in, but he isn't very aggressive outside of that. He doesn't go out actively seeking combat like Akantor. Not to mention his general visual design is much smoother, though he does have some sharp bits. He's much chunkier in his sort of existence as a whole, and the obvious parallels of one living in a field of ice and the other in the middle of an active volcano. Aside from this, a big reason these monsters are often paired together is that they are both called flying wyverns despite a clear inability to currently fly. The reason for that is that they essentially evolved from what were once flying wyverns to be what they currently are. And while their current shape is much closer to what we would now classify as like a fanged wyvern, that distinction didn't really exist, and it makes for a constantly funny moment when talking about these monsters to people who have never heard of them before. They're, what? Flying wyverns? Are you sure? Is that a mistake? No, but it is important for this discussion as well. First off, why do I think that they could come back in Wilds? Well, firstly, it's a pretty major one. I may have limited knowledge of the game, but I'm pretty sure that this, at this point, well, might not end up being a full open world Monster Hunter game. This is going to be the biggest Monster Hunter game we've ever had as far as pure hunting space. The number of available zones, the size of the zones themselves, the game is going to have a lot of big, wide open spaces. In previous Monster Hunter games, the main reason we haven't often expected the return of these two is that the maps are just too small to sort of slip them into a normal map, which means they would need entire arenas designed specifically to fit them. Partially because they require very opposite environments as well. You can't even just design one and stick them both there because one of them needs a volcano and the other needs a field of ice. But then also because of their sheer size. As an example, we had a pretty volcanic area with Safi'jiiva and Iceborne, which is where we fight Elatrion, and this is a proper arena. And that would feel like a pretty small area if we were to fight, say, Akantor in there if he was put there, because he's just way too big in comparison. So what they need is larger spaces for these monsters. Combine that one with the fact that you pretty much have to put both of these monsters in if you have the other one, and you're basically asking the developers to make two whole arenas with these two as the focus, or at least that was how it used to be, because again, in a game like Wilds, which promises such massive open hunting spaces, all we really need is an area with an ice biome and an area with a volcanic biome, and you could easily justify actually sticking them in. Not to mention that technically Akantor is pretty mobile, so you don't even have to fight him in a volcano. It's just where he's the most comfortable and where you fought him in the past. Point being, more than any prior Monster Hunter game, it is a possibility for these two to exist in their original versions once again, and even aside from the sort of technical aspect of it, lore-wise, you could even argue that because somewhere in their evolutionary chain these monsters had wings they could fly in previous versions of them. That would explain why they could go to different continents, to different areas. Wherever Wilds actually takes place within the Monster Hunter universe, they could feasibly get there because of their ancient versions, and then of course they would continually evolve and lose the wings anyways. So that covered, why do I actually want these monsters? Well, personally, I just love massive monsters. I love spectacle monsters, and these two are just on that perfect edge of monster size where they are still actually intriguing and intricate fights that feel like you're hunting a monster, rather than becoming something like Zora Magdaros, where you can barely damage it without siege weapons, or Lao Shan Lung, who is basically just a walking health bar that you slowly chip away at. These two still fight back. They have unique attacks, they're clearly actually attacking hunters, they have personality to them, and it feels good to actually hunt them. Ukanlos uses a lot of his just general body shape to fight, things like slamming his giant shovel chin around, but he also uses it to fling snowballs and even dig forwards halfway into the ice, almost like a shark in water, sort of like what Zamtrios does, but doing it through very solid ice. It's just incredibly terrifying to see something that large doing something like that, but with a monster that I personally find to be sort of cute when he's not trying to, assault you like Jaws. And I still stand by the idea that he's probably Dodogama's father. I mean, just look at those eyes and tell me that these guys are not at least somehow related. He also fires massive beams of ice, and even though he's one of the biggest monsters that you'll fight, he isn't immobile. He's fast, and he uses one of my favorite techniques, which is just jump into the air and try and land on the hunter and squish them, because it's just one of the silliest things that a monster can do while still being reasonably effective and not immersion breaking, because again, it makes sense. If you have a size advantage, you use the size advantage, even if it looks silly when you do it. Akantor, on the other hand, does a lot of charging, forward momentum. He has a scary beam of like pure sound and hot air that he will fire out at you from a mile away to create these just really tense moments in the fight where you know what's coming, you know what's gonna happen next, and you know what you're supposed to do to get rid of it, but you have to still execute it perfectly or you'll get hit and probably die. Then he also just sort of does massive damage near him when he roars as well, because he's just that good of a singer. I love both of their movesets as monsters. I love that despite their similarities, they're such clearly different fights and clearly different creatures from each other too. And I feel like the more advanced the Monster Hunter games get, the more enjoyable this specific type of monster were. Again, they are way bigger than most monsters, but still not quite big enough that it becomes a siege fight, because siege fights are a totally different beast entirely. Past this, I want to talk about changes that I would like to see, or at least consider possible, going into Monster Hunter Wilds for these two, and honestly, a lot of their movesets are really solid as is, and the main thing that I'd want to see change is just have them feel a bit more natural in their movements, a bit less robotic, which of course is just a natural thing going from the older Monster Hunter games into newer ones. Akantor does a lot of digging to the opposite side of the zone to fire off a beam that's very predictable. I think we would make that sort of work into his general movement, make him just move around, maybe give him some other options when he digs away, so that when he does do the beam, it's a bit more surprising, which I feel will make it feel at least a little bit less scripted. The same thing you could do with Ukanlos' shark ice dig maneuver, where it feels like it's an event right now that has a set amount of time that it lasts and then it's done. There are clear ways to avoid it, but it's very dangerous. Both of these monsters could have some just sort of looks into basically the triggers of their abilities, just given some more extra options that they could do so it's not obvious what they're going to do next, and given some extra context animations or things like that to interact with the terrain around them, as well as their actual AI changed a little bit to make it just feel more natural and fit in with the pacing of modern Monster Hunter 2, of course, which I think is going to be very easy for them to do because they've already updated monster AI in general. Most of the changes that I would make to these two monsters are honestly pretty minor. I think they are awesome monsters in themselves. I think they would fit in really well with just a bit of general tidying up to their moveset and visuals, and I also don't think that there's a whole lot of them that doesn't feel like it's taken advantage of in their moveset. It's not like they have an ability that we know about through lore that they just don't use. They do actually have a lot of stuff to do. But of course, I do like to get a little bit wacky in this section when it comes to these two. The Frontier Floodgates were technically opened in Monster Hunter Sunbreak when Espinas came to the main series, and one of my favorite technical just concepts from Frontier itself is origin species. These are like the ancient prevolutions of the monsters that we know and love today. Ukanlos and Akantor are flying wyverns because they used to fly until they evolved and then lost their wings. So what if one day, maybe even in Wilds, or maybe it's expansion if we have the normal monsters in base Wilds, we could get to fight something like an ancient origin species version of Ukanlos and Akantor, winged creatures of death. Imagine something like that with wings. I mean, just think about those two giant chonkers with airship-sized wings on either side of them, carrying them around. That would be absolutely terrifying, but also make for a really fun hunting moment, especially given that they both seem to like trying to do damage by just squishing you and falling on you. So maybe if you give them wings, they just like try and fly above you and then fall on you repeatedly and just do this as their entire fight. Okay, maybe I'm going a bit too much into the deep end, but I like both of these monsters quite a lot. Everyone has a favorite between the two, minus obviously Ukanlos, but they are inseparable between each other, and they haven't been around for a full generation. So what exactly is stopping them from making a return with a little bit of a glow up in Monster Monster Hunter Wilds. As far as I'm concerned, nothing really. Obviously, I'm missing a ton of info on the game. I haven't seen a bunch of the trailers, I haven't played the beta or seen the early previews that people got to do at in-person events either, so there could be plenty of reasons for these monsters to not be coming to the game, or potentially the opposite, where there might even be reasons that we are more likely to expect them that I don't know about. But as it currently stands, these two monsters are near the top of my list for things that I would like to see return in a game that promises to be as big and open as Wild seems to be. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Just a bit of a talk about Ukanlos and Akantor, as two monsters that I just love to see return and come back to the series with a little bit of love and improvements in Monster Hunter Wilds. And yeah, sure, maybe this is just because I need some sort of outlet for my pure just excitement and joy about Wilds, but you don't see me judging you, okay? Like if you like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.